Hello and welcome to the Monopath podcast. Today I'm speaking with Ebby Lou Horner. Ebby is a print artist, and so it would be remiss of me to avoid the topic directly. And we'll get into that a little. More of the conversation centred on the relationship between well-being, specifically mental well-being, and art or creativity. And that meant that it was quite important to speak about the emotions and the connection between negative emotion and positive artwork, which is to ask whether an improvement in one's mood attenuates their ability to create something. As I see it, that is the question to address when considering creativity and art. At least of all, for me, I more or less tailor my life around making myself suffer less. And I have found that there is some coincidental relationship between that improvement and a net reduction in creative output. So I guess I'm really identifying there what my intent is going into these conversations. Frankly, the purpose for doing most things for me is to have some net positive effect on my own well-being. With that in mind, if there's somebody you think would benefit from listening to this conversation, if you have enjoyed it, there are ways you can support the podcast. You can either visit the website, click on the Support Me tab, and you can help encourage me to keep doing these things. And that's that. So let's get down to it. Ebby, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here.
I'm very happy for you to be here as well. You're the first artist, really, to be on the podcast. So I've spoken to a poet and somebody who is primarily a musician, but I was really keen to speak to somebody who I already know about drawing and art, because I do think there's quite a big difference, even though they're all forms of creativity. I think there's a big difference between poetry on one end of things and drawing and art that you do on the other. I think they're quite different things, and I've gone to that other places, but for here I thought it would be helpful just to begin by maybe going through your history with art. Maybe you could just tell people a little bit about you and what you do.
So I've always had like a really keen interest in drawing. I've always drawn for as long as I can remember, since being very, very young. And from a very young age, I did always want to be an artist, but I was often strayed from that path with like my parents or maybe people, like outside influences, maybe people not thinking that my art is great or those kind of things. But then as I got older, I started dealing a lot with depression, anxiety. I had a lot of deaths close to me, things like that, which kind of spearheaded me into using art for my own survival. And I think that's what I've been doing ever since. I've just been lucky enough to be able to turn this thing that really helps me into kind of a business venture too, with making my merch and doing personal commissions and those kind of things. I've been able to not only use what is essentially my therapy for my own benefit, but also to link to other people and benefit other people too, which I think at the end of the day, I think most artists want that connection with other people as much as their works might be very personal to them. I think it is all about having that connectivity to like everyone going through similar situations.
Yeah, there's an exchange really with any kind of art, I think. You know, you put your you pour yourself into whatever it is you're putting out into the world, but it's definitely met by somebody else, and that changes the art. That fundamentally changes it when it gets to somebody else and is received by somebody else. What they do with it when it's in their head and what they say is a different thing, and maybe in between it there's something.
Yeah, it's completely up to them.
I think in the middle of it there's something almost subjective there, and either side of it there's two subjects looking at it. And I mean, I find that really interesting. I think there's a lot of ways we could go from that, and I didn't expect to get here so quickly, but I think because you mentioned the word therapy and using art for it, let's go into that a little bit. What is it about the art that is therapeutic?
I think the thing for me is that within art, I can show the person that I used to be, the person that I am now, and the person that I'm wanting to be. And I think being able to have that kind of reflection and almost like forward reflection and kind of editing of the person that I do want to become, I think it helps me to really kind of stay on track with like my beliefs and the way that I want to conduct myself. And I do think within that, it kind of helps to give me clarity within the struggles that I've faced personally. And I think it is very therapeutic to kind of work through that journey and be able to physically see the results of that through art.
Yeah, is there a difference then? Because it's a bit like, I would assume that you're presupposing most of what you create with the idea of it being therapeutic. I only have my own experience, and it's like most of the time when I'm creating anything, I don't really know what I'm doing. It just seems to happen.
Yeah.
How does that kind of presupposition of this is a therapeutic practice, how does that shape the kind of art that you produce?
I think it's because there's some things that I create for print, such as like things that are specifically designed for merch. And those things I wouldn't say I always have that deep personal connection with. I think those things I draw because I want to draw those, and I go into that with a slightly different mindset. But most of the work that I do for prints and like publishing for people to have that artwork up in their house, for example, I really have to be personally connected to it for me to feel as though that art is what I'm actually putting out. I find that I always go into drawings with maybe an idea of how I want it to be, and it always ends up differing because the emotional connection that I have to the things that I'm putting out there is really what shapes the final outcome.
Yeah, how much of it is conscious and how much of it is just felt? If the distinction's not that obvious there, like I just think when something, a lot of my art and the music that I write is just felt. I'm not really conscious of what it is. When I say that I don't know what I'm doing, it's because it's not conscious at all. It's not, I haven't drawn it out and made it elaborate in my mind, like the image of my mind. I can't really do that so easily. It just kind of occurs, like it's felt. So yeah, how much of your work is conscious or how much of it is just kind of felt?
I'd say the main conscious decision of most of my art is that kind of start point, because I always kind of vaguely know what I want to do. For example, I recently did a rainbow that's got a really grumpy face and it's sat on a wall. And the rainbow is very muted. The decision to draw a rainbow was my original starting point, and that is what I wanted to do. But the colours and the expression and all those kind of things, really, it is kind of an autopilot thing where I'm drawing these things and I am putting so much of myself into it that I almost want to portray the things that I'm going through whilst doing this drawing within the drawing. So, for example, that drawing is mainly to show the stark contrast between the life that I feel that I project, that I'm a happy, bubbly person and I'm very like approachable and things like that. But that rainbow shows how I actually feel. It's very muted and it's got a grumpy kind of face. And I feel like I'm able to show the kind of two sides of who I am, the duality of who I am in that piece by doing that.
That's really interesting. So is that description of it something that was there early on? I suppose actually a better way of phrasing that is, when did that description occur to you? When did you know that that's what the art was about?
I would say after my first initial sketch, because I go through probably 3 to 4 sketches originally. And then it's by the kind of last finalisation of like editing certain bits that I kind of have a way that I want to go with it. And by that time, it's almost like I can be drawing something and it just doesn't sit right with me. I'm not connecting to it. So for example, with that rainbow drawing, I can't actually remember what it started out as, but it didn't start out in the way that it's presented. And I kind of it all felt too bubbly and too bright, and I needed to bring a little bit of that morose energy into it. And I think that does come within the kind of finalisation stage where I really think, is this what I want to put out? Is this the part of me that I want to show in this artwork? Because I think in almost everything I do other than my merchandise side of things, you really can see the almost the tumultuous nature of the things that I go through in the life that I lead.
Yeah, it must be really difficult because you've got your work set out for you really to say an awful lot of things without using any words to do it. I mean, the obvious comparison I would draw there, or the only way that I can really appreciate it, because I'm not somebody who is gifted in the same way that you are. Like I write the music, so for me, that process begins with kind of sounds, melodies, rhythms, that sort of thing. And as it develops, I end up getting to the point where there's words and then finally lyrics towards the very end of it. And it isn't really until I get to the lyrics that I have a sense of, oh, this song is about X, Y, and Z. It's about this thing or that thing.
Yeah.
But in drawing and art, that stage isn't as explicit or as necessary. Ultimately, it's not as intrinsic to the final product to know what your art is about.
Yeah.
So how valuable do you think it is to be able to put your finger on it and say, well, this is what this is about?
I think for me personally, I do find it quite valuable because a lot of the times in my art, I've been able to kind of bridge gaps that I wouldn't have personally been able to do. And I think, again, it does come back to that kind of connectivity where I just want to be able to have that relation to someone whilst dealing with things that feel very isolating, such as like anxiety and depression. And although not always is it a conscious decision to like put that out there, I do think it is just part of the way that I work. And I do find that with other aspects of my life, such as hobbies, personal relationships, like my work life, I do have to have that personal connection. Otherwise, I just can't, I'm just not all in it. I have to be, it's kind of like an all or nothing. I have to really have a connection or I just cannot commit to it in the same way.
It's quite an, I think there's something pure about drawing, visual art in general, I suppose, because it is, the words are almost superfluous to needs. You can, as I said, that the hard part about it, the challenge is to say a lot without saying anything.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
I find that quite interesting or curious because I'm not somebody, as I say, who draws or really does that. But it seems the closest to music in a sense, because that is almost inexplicable when it falls out of my mind in whatever way that it does. I wanted to ask you about the kinds of things that you end up drawing then, because there are certainly some themes.
Yeah.
You know, if you scroll through your Instagram, there's a couple of themes, and you can almost see the evolution of style, and maybe even your own taste. But let's talk about whales.
Yeah.
And animals, really. So there's a regular theme about with animals and whales in particular. Where does that come from?
So originally, the name Mobyslick, which is obviously the name of my business, it came from originally a nickname that I had in high school, where I used to get called Moby, and that was not from any deep, like, profound thing. It was just that one day on a Starbucks cup, they wrote my name wrong and they wrote it as Moby, and then I just got called that. And then as I progressed and like got older and wanted to have that kind of artistic persona, I really wanted to use something that was personal to me, and the Moby thing kind of got me thinking that. And when obviously the first thing you think of when Moby, you either think of the singer or you think of the whale, Moby Dick, and all that kind of thing. I kind of felt more of a resonation to the whale than the sailors in this story, in the way that sometimes things can be misconstrued, and sometimes it's hard to feel as though you are kind of on the back foot and people have preconceived like a perception of you that you cannot control. And for me, Mobyslick is about kind of flipping the narrative and seeing things from a different perspective.
Do you think, because a lot of the art is about, or includes whales, how do you really communicate that?
I think part of it is, obviously there's quite a few whales that are endangered or that are at risk. I actually have a tattoo of like, I think there's 6 whales on my leg, that are all endangered. I have it's a very deep connection, and although they're not, I wouldn't say they're like my favourite animal or something like that, I've kind of always been in awe of their kind of quiet communication and how, because obviously they work on kind of sonar and all that thing, and it's something that we as humans don't understand, but to them it is a very profound thing that is their whole communication system. And I've always kind of felt like I've been on a different wavelength to other people, and I haven't always been understood or heard. And I kind of feel that resonation with whales because of that. And also in the way of the endangerment and things like that, I've been in some difficult positions in my life, and I have felt like it has only been me at times that's been the one trying to fight for my own survival. And I think by using whales in just presenting them, I think it does make people think more about the animal, as well as what that animal might represent in the context of my art. So, for example, I did one recently where it's just like a kind of monotone pink drawing, and it's all of sperm whales, which sperm whales links back to Moby Dick, because he was a sperm whale. And again, they are on the endangered species list as well. And I think just that simple monotone piece of work is so thought-provoking that it becomes more than just the art that you are seeing with your eyes. It becomes about the individual interpretation of that. And I think throughout my life I've always had that sense of individuality where I've not really always connected to other people, but being able to just put something out that, although many people might think of it in vastly different ways, that is the connecting feature. Like, it is thought-provoking, and me being able to do that is kind of giving myself the voice that I've not always felt that I had.
It's interesting as well. I wonder if there's a bit of an analogy with the fact that you're an artist and you draw rather than being a singer or a poet or anything like that as well, because as you were saying, the way that whales communicate is without words. It's just these kind of drone notes. And it's quite nice because essentially you're doing the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
You're just communicating these really complicated and nuanced meanings, but without saying anything. There's a nice parallel there as well that I just thought was worth maybe adding to what you said. Speaking of that piece, I really liked that piece. I saw that, and
great.
For listeners to this as well, like you can find that over on the Mobyslick Instagram, the whale piece that we're talking about. If that helps, you can go have a look at that as well. But in that particular one, you were saying about how there was a lack of colour, so it was more monochrome than some of the other pieces that you do. What do you think the effect of, or how do you use colour to create certain effects?
I'm really glad you asked me that, because colour is such an important part of every single design that I ever make. Most designs will always have some kind of pink in, especially my more recent art. And I think pink to me connects me to my vulnerability. And I think especially in that whale piece, it is just about the vulnerability of animals and the way that they're treated and misunderstood. And like, again, that sonar, that they're speaking an unspoken language, like they fully understand and communicate in that way, but we don't understand that. And it's about bridging that gap. And I think by doing it in that monochrome way, it helps to kind of show that you have to look deeper than just the picture.
Yeah, totally. So in that one, it is a lot of pinks as well. It's quite explicitly pinks and quite soft reds. Do you think, or kind of what are your thoughts really on sort of the psychology of colours? Are you aware of much of that, or do you try to put it in? Obviously, you said a little bit about pink, but do you purposely involve new colours or additions to that for specific reasons, like conscious choices, or did they just fall into place?
I would say I'm quite lucky in a way that I get kind of two perspectives of my art. I get my own perspective of drawing what I'm feeling, and I also have art therapy, so I kind of get it in two different ways. In my art therapy, with it being obviously with a psychiatrist, not a psychiatrist, psychotherapist, sorry, I do get more of that kind of physical representation of things, like red bad, like green good, that kind of general knowledge of colour psychology. I do get that, and I do tend to find it easier within therapy to communicate in that way because it's easier to understand. But in my own artwork, I actively challenge that, and I do choose to use colour in a different way that does make you think, because a lot of the things that I, for example, use red in are never the bold, shocking, like almost dangerous pieces that you might expect, but they tend to be more of an emotional kind of thought-provoking piece. And I think it's important to really challenge what you know, because again, it kind of links back to art being more than what is on the surface. And if people are only taking the colours for what they already preconceive it to be, then they're really missing the point of the art that I'm putting out there.
Having learned some psychology of colour through the art therapy work that you've done, do you think that has improved the quality of your drawing?
I would definitely say so. I think before I actually started connecting more of, because my art has always been about how I felt, but I've not always connected with that. I've always kind of drawn more sad things. For example, I've always, since being a child, drawn sad clowns. And that for me is my way of showing my depression, because clowns are meant to look happy and bright and have energy, but these clowns are sad, and that's how I kind of feel like I represent myself. Like, I might look bright and bubbly on the inside, but that's not always how I'm feeling. And I think with delving into that within therapy as well, it's kind of helped me broaden my own artistic ability. Like, it's enabled me to delve more into what textures can represent and how I can use shadow and light and different analogies to really get across what I want to say. And I think that kind of connection back to really who I am and how I feel about my own art is what helps me progress into becoming more of the artist that I want to be.
I think we've skirted around it a little bit, but what we're really talking about with therapy, and whether it's felt or conscious, a lot of this we're talking about knowledge. So kind of the epistemology of art, really. Would you agree then? I suppose what I would want to ask is, would you agree that there's a large degree of creativity that is self knowledge?
I would agree. And I think a lot of creativity and imagination really comes from situational things, like being in like really sad states and wanting that escapism really helped me to broaden my imagination and think outside of the world that I already knew. Because I needed to kind of transcend that to help myself. But also, at times when I've been my happiest, I've drawn some of my saddest work, being able to reflect on that. And I think you do have to be quite creative, but I do think it just comes from almost the knowledge of your own person, that yourself. And I think it's much easier to be creative when you truly understand who you are, because you can really tap into those different nuances and things that are very personal to your own experience, and you can represent that through your art.
Yeah, I guess I'm struggling to conceptualize it a little bit, but having heard you answer that, it's made me think that there must be a parallel there that goes on between learning a craft, so learning how to draw in your case, or learning how to write music or perform it in mine. There must be a parallel between that skill and knowing yourself.
Yeah, I don't think that you necessarily have to be classed as talented or gifted or anything like that to be able to create art. I think being artistic and being creative is really about being able to kind of hone in on the lived experiences and things that are unique to you and make you the person that you are today, and be able to vocalize that. And I think that comes into a lot of different ways. Like, a lot of musicians obviously talk about many different topics. There's a lot of people who are creative in different ways, like even making furniture and things like that. People do put a lot of their own person into those things. And I think when you learn to really broaden your mind to the concept of other people's creativity, being different to your own concept of that, I think you're able to kind of look at things in a different way.
Yeah, I suppose part of that as well is that with art, because it is shared, it's like a conversation with somebody else, that the learning and the self-exploration is also shared.
Yeah.
And so you almost learn a bit more about yourself through somebody else's interpretation of something you've created. I guess that leads me to ask, do you think you can put too much of yourself in your art?
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. I think you walk a fine line between putting out your raw emotion and kind of passing the point of the art by being too emotional with it. I don't know if that makes sense. But
would that be like saying that you can't get much done if all you do is feel? You know, at some point you've got to have something. We are people, so you've got to be able to verbalize and make conscious some of those emotions to understand them.
Yeah.
And if you're simply just repeating a feeling.
Yeah. I think sometimes you can almost make being creative painful for yourself. And that is almost always the thing that detracts from the work that you make. And I think it is important to put that barrier up, because as much as it is very impactful to put a lot of yourself into your work, sometimes because you've put so much into it, it becomes almost too difficult for you to acknowledge, and you kind of lose that connection to the craft. There's definitely been times where I've been drawing far too emotionally, and I've just had to step away and leave it for even sometimes months, because I've really been I've felt too much in every stroke of a pen. And I needed to have that space where I gave myself time to process and heal, and really, really kind of collect my experiences into a way that I find I can manageably put out to the world.
I suppose that's a question of how much of yourself you can possibly digest in one sitting.
Yeah.
Sometimes raw emotion is quite the mouthful.
Oh yes, definitely.
So you can't really take too much in one go. I mean, I've certainly felt that before, and I actually don't write. I'm not a very emotional person anyway, but I mean, it's there, and that comes out in my writing, but I'm not particularly emotional when I write. I mean, that's an evolution for me. I always used to be a lot more emotional when I was younger, and less so now. I probably just got better with it again, which has been coordinate with my developing the skill of being able to create anything, really.
Yeah.
This kind of makes me feel like, have you ever read the book, The Picture of Dorian Gray, the Oscar Wilde book?
I haven't, no.
You would like that. It's very interesting. It kind of explores some of these things, but this is maybe a slight spoiler alert, but come on, the book's quite old at this point. It's a Victorian book, so if you don't already know about it, then tough. But part of that is that the painter who paints the portrait of Dorian Gray, Basil, thinks it's his best work, but initially doesn't want it published because he says he's put too much of himself in it.
Yeah.
There's too much of him there, and people will see parts of him that he's not ready to share.
Yeah. I can definitely resonate with that. Absolutely.
What really struck me with what you were saying there was when you said that with every stroke of the pen there was pain, and it was difficult. And I think that should be a clear indication when you are trying to create that is a signal to back off.
Yeah.
and give it a break.
Yeah, that's a line that I'm crossing.
Yeah. I guess the parallel question, or the question that's directly opposite to the last, was, do you think you can put too few of your emotions into the artwork that you produce?
I would definitely agree with that, yeah. I think Because I'd say realistically, about 30% of the art that I actually do is what I put out. I draw so many different things that just never make it past the initial sketch, really. Or I'll spend sometimes hours on things and then just delete it, and I just don't want it to ever see it again. And I think those things are the things that I don't put enough of myself into, because at the end of the day, the reason that I don't publish them or put them out there is because I don't see myself in the work that I've made. And I think there's part of being a creative that requires that authenticity. And you kind of lose that when you really disconnect from the things that you make.
Yeah. Do you find that particularly challenging when you come to do commission work? How do you find ways to put your emotion and keep yourself in it without obscuring the commission?
Yeah, I definitely find commission work really hard. I find it very difficult to self-motivate with commission work, and I do think it is because I don't have as much of that emotion in there. But I think the main things that I do to keep it really me is by keeping those same kind of strokes that I would put into my personal work, in that, so like maybe small bits of stylized things that I would put out into an emotional piece, I can take away and apply that to something else. So for example, I might draw a self-portrait in a really specific way, and then I might use those skills to do that into a commission of, say, 2 people, because as much as I can't physically connect to that emotion, I know that behind that artwork and for the people that I'm doing it for, there is some emotion. So although I can't directly relate to it, I have that kind of shared experience still.
Yeah, there's definitely a utility to being provoked by an idea that wasn't yours. Something that's more collaborative. Say if you are doing a back and forth between, I don't know how it would work with artists, but collaborating on a piece of art. I know for a musician it's much easier because I've written songs in a band before in groups, and there is that back and forth is quite evident. But I think there's a lot of value in kind of developing somebody else's initial idea, because it's almost as if it's something you would never usually do, say, whatever that might be, any of your previous commission pieces, perhaps an idea occurs to you as I'm speaking. But if it's something you would never usually do, or they ask for, or they put restrictions on the commission that you wouldn't usually put in place, that in a way can almost create a different effect to you, to your experience. So the emotions that you're having and the thoughts that you're thinking. Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, I would say the first thing that came to mind when you said that was a lot of the portrait kind of commissions that I do. And a lot of that does come down to personal preference. A lot of the time I have to send it back and forwards a lot to get edits from the customer, because they might not see that person in the same way I do. For example, I might have copied too directly from a photo and put too many wrinkles on a person that didn't want that to be shown. Or maybe I've got even things down to like eye colour and things wrong. I think a lot of that comes from, with commission work, I have to put that bit of me in, but I also have to stay quite closely to the picture. And in my own work, I don't really copy from a picture. I don't draw from things that are in real life. I try to, apart from in terms of the animals and things that I draw, I try to surpass the average expectation of that thing. And I think it it is important to be able to edit yourself into that more palatable way. So it is more digestible sometimes for the everyday person to enjoy and share with their own kind of circle.
It must be difficult. I mean, I've been on the other side of that, working with artists and designers before to develop ideas that I've had. And a lot of the time, the struggle that I can imagine you must have had, and that's kind of what you were just saying, is that for somebody who hasn't developed that analytical, descriptive ability of art, they only have the emotion, the felt part of an idea. And if you don't have the cognitive component of it, the kind of the more verbal part of it, you can't explain what it is that you want. And if you're the person on the other end of that conversation trying to interpret, what does this person actually want? How do you get that information out of them? How do you find common ground?
I think a lot of it is I have to realise that those people would not have asked me to do this piece if they didn't respect and also have an interest in the work that I create. So I think sometimes the reason I struggle with things is because I try to look too much for the similarities between me and that person, when really I just need to be able to portray their idea in my own way, and that is good enough.
Yeah, is there maybe a mistake there for people who are asking for a commission and they don't see that there is a conversation going on? There's two subjects meeting in the middle somewhere. I think there might be a misperception there between people who are requesting a commission piece and those who are giving it.
Yeah.
I wondered if we could go back to something you mentioned earlier. You were talking about how, with the commission thing, to what degree is something in your mind's eye when you're drawing? So I guess what I mean is, if you're drawing, say the whale one, for example, like, is the picture of the whale there already? Can you see it? Or is it just kind of following out from the pen, like almost stumbling its way onto the page?
Almost never. I cannot say that I've ever really drawn what I've thought I would draw, if that makes sense. Like, I might have an idea of what I want it to look like, but I don't think it's ever actually come out that way. I think that initial idea is important to kind of give me that kind of structure to work around, and give me the basis of what I want to do. But I think if I really did stick to that kind of guide, I would lose a lot of what makes my art special and individual. And it's important to me to keep that going. So I do try to push myself beyond the things that I have thought. And I think it does come into that question of like being imaginative and being creative. It's all about constantly developing and broadening your own capability of imagination, and being able to expand the minds of the people that also view it, and show them that there is really a bigger picture out there. You just have to allow yourself to really open up to that.
How are you using the words imagination and creativity differently there?
So I would say imagination is more of the things that cannot be conceived, the things that you think of that are outside the realms of the world that you know. Thinking up different creatures and colours and all that kind of thing. Whereas I think creativity is about the more of the development and the kind of act of creation.
Okay.
So I would say creativity is what imagination it breeds. It is the outcome of imagination.
I understand. So it's almost as if imagination is what happens before you create something.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense. That's it. It's really interesting because everybody's definition of these things seems to be slightly different, which was what inspired me to do something like a podcast about what those things are in the first place, because there's no large consensus about what something that is intrinsically human is. And that strikes me as a very odd thing for nobody to be able to collectively agree on what something that is collectively shared is called and what it is.
Yeah.
It's a very strange thing.
I think that's the beauty of being an artist, though, because it is about taking that this kind of shape-shifting thing that we all know but all share a different opinion of, and really making it your own thing. You kind of nurture it into your own creation. And I think without all those different perspectives of imagination and creativity, it would be the art and music and creatives that we do see now would be much, much fewer. Because you need that kind of diversity to really have the difference between those things. Like, if every artist had the same view of creativity or the same imagination, how boring would the world be?
For me, somebody who studies philosophy, my project is to be precise about what these sort of intuitions and what feelings are, and being able to put them into words. That's kind of the job of a philosopher anyway. That's what probably sparked my interest in saying, okay, let's define it. Let's say that this is what creativity is and what it isn't, and what imagination is and what it isn't. And I suppose what you were saying revealed to me another way that people use the words. And sometimes imagination does seem to be used as a pejorative. So they would say that that's not real, it's just your imagination.
Yeah.
And I think the creative step of this process is almost playing into the hands of our natural biases. So we have a visual bias. We say things are real when we can see them and when they're tangible and we can grasp them.
Yeah.
And I feel like part of what you do is playing on that and taking things that are, for some, not considered to be real because they only exist abstractly in the mental space of somebody's head, and making them tangible, making them viewable and seeable and real in a way. Does that resonate with you at all, that description?
Yeah, definitely. I would say a lot of what makes me want to continue being creative and being an artist is just really pushing the boundaries of what people know. A lot of my stuff is always a little bit weird, like hands with faces or different things like that. Weird, like just nondescript beings and things like that. I find it's about those things will appear in more than just my imagination, I'm sure. And I want to show that those things can be real because you've thought it. If everyone believed that their imagination would never become reality, we wouldn't have got to space. We wouldn't have really had some of the really progressive things that have happened throughout the world. Those things wouldn't have happened without giving yourself that having that kind of desire to make your imagination something that is tangible and something that other people can have that kind of outside view into what goes on within the person.
In philosophy, you would call that the difference between epistemology and ontology, which is in plainer terms that people would actually recognize.
Yes, please.
Is like saying, what is the difference between what we can know, which is really to say something about the limits of our ability to perceive things
Yeah.
and to think, and what there is to be known. So what's already there, we only have this fairly fragile bandwidth that we take in the world, which is partly why we fail to comprehend what whales are doing when they're speaking to one another.
Yeah.
What is real, or what is really there? I think when it's a social thing, that could be more malleable and easy to manipulate than something like a property of nature or something like that. So I guess what I'm saying there is that the role of the imagination and creativity is to change the social world, or to kind of coordinate the social world with the private one.
I would definitely say that is true. I think, again, most artists do want that connection, and I think it's important to have that connection for people to really understand your artwork. And by helping people broaden what they thought was conceivable, you do kind of bring that connectivity back around, and it'll allow people to expand but together.
Yeah, well, do you think there's a way that good art then can actually change the world, as cheesy as that might sound?
I'd like to think so. I think a lot of my art, I do try to be diverse, and when I draw people, and I almost try to make things that aren't specifically personal. For example, drawing a white person or a black person or a man or a woman or whatever. I try to just draw a thing that everyone can relate to. So there's no bridge that needs to be crossed in that regard. It's all just about really getting to know the art and sharing that full experience of the art. And I think sometimes you can be profound in that way and like bring about change positively through just art.
Yeah, I think some of the things there is that there are human universals, and beauty is probably one of them.
Yeah.
So when you're creating art, there is a reliance on what is commonly perceived to be beautiful, and you just replicating that wherever you see it.
Yeah.
And so when you say you're kind of trying to be diverse in the artwork that you produce, or in the kind of people that you might be tempted to draw, that's really just a reflection of the belief that beauty is kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
It's fairly pervasive, and it doesn't really, I mean, I think of that like there's these concepts. To say that beauty isn't everywhere is like saying that sadness is not everywhere, or
exactly.
any other emotion is not anywhere. It's a concept that's shared, and you can just see it anywhere. I mean, do you think that, this is probably a fairly deep question, but do you think that beauty is actually there, or do you think that beauty is something that is given to or assigned to things by people, or something that's conscious?
I think beauty is there. I think one thing that I try and put across in my art is something that I've personally experienced. So in life, all I've ever got growing up is that I'm unconventionally attractive, which is, to me, sounds like a backhanded compliment.
Just a little.
But I've learnt to kind of make that my own thing. Like, I might not be what the like societal picture of beauty is, but I am beautiful in my own way, and I think it does come down to that in art. It's kind of that idea of beauty is in the eye of the beholder, because it really is like something that I might find disgusting, like a picture that someone else has drawn. I might think, oh God, that's awful, but that might be the best thing that you've ever seen, and you really connect to that. And I think it is about finding beauty in unconventional things that is the thing that keeps us all together. Like, there really is beauty everywhere.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing as well, because even in speaking about that, like as you were then, it's almost as if you kind of danced from one to the other of it's naturally always there. There is beauty, whether there's people or not, there's still something that's beautiful, but then also that we give it to it.
Yeah.
So do we make something more beautiful? You know, if somebody happens to perceive one thing as beautiful, do we make it more beautiful, or is it already beautiful and we just recognize it?
Oh, I would say if I had to give an answer, because that is a very like profound question, I'm gonna think about that for a long time. But I think it is already there. I think it is something that is found. I think sometimes the journey to finding that is often clouded by things that maybe we're expected to see. And it's about working beyond that and seeing the beauty that is and has always been there. It might not just be the idea of beauty that you have been streamlined into thinking is the conception of beauty.
Yeah, there's something about authenticity there as well with beauty, isn't there? I think beauty is quite a difficult term when you're speaking about a person compared to when you're speaking about art. If you're speaking about a portrait of a person and saying that that person is beautiful, that feels very different in some way to the statement that the person themselves is beautiful, or they feel different. I think the one of them feels a little bit more distant compared to the other.
Yeah.
Like you're not really making a statement that's personal or opinionated.
Yeah, I think it does come down to taking things personally. Like one of the things that I used to do with that unconventional beauty comment is think, oh, well, I must be ugly then. But that's not really what it's about. It's about being beautiful in a different way, and kind of embracing that, and allowing it to exist as its own thing.
You should do a self-portrait.
You know, do you know what? I've got an old one that I did a few years ago, and it's just like I've drawn every flaw that I can see in myself. My eyes are too small, my nose is improportionately big, my forehead's completely improportionately big, so are my cheeks. It's literally just like someone's asked me to draw every vice that I personally see in myself on a paper, and I find that when I do self-portraits, I do often do that with a lot of them, which again is contradicting what I'm saying about finding things unconventionally beautiful and trying to find the beauty in things. But I think by putting things like that out there, like the imperfections that I saw in myself, and making that drawing public and showing it, I think it is still beautiful in its own right, because by putting it out there, the flaws are there for everyone to see, and I do have to embrace it to an extent to put it out there in the first place.
Yeah, it's a different way of getting at yourself as well, I think. I can imagine if you drew yourself every year or something like that, it would reveal something different each time, like about your state of mind. I mean, I tend to talk about, when I'm talking about music, or particularly when I'm talking about the tea, actually. So I have the tea that's inspired by the music, and the idea was always that you could taste the songs. And when I'm trying to explain that to somebody, I usually draw a comparison to how different languages try to explain one thing and put a word to something. So how, say, the English will have one word for cat, and then the French have another, and then there's images and paintings of that are all different, but they're all kind of homing in on this central concept of catness.
Yeah,
that's kind of.
I'm glad you picked cats.
Yeah, I did specifically. But I think that's kind of what is going on. If you were to do a self-portrait of yourself, if you were to do a self-portrait every year or every day or whatever it might be, it's almost as if you are homing in on ebbiness.
Yeah, the essence of what I am as a physical form.
And I wonder how much you are doing that in the more abstract things with whales and animals and all of the other things that you draw. It would almost be like, the way to answer that would be to look at, okay, what things are common to all of your work, Like, what are the patterns there? What are the colours that you use, and what are the shapes that you use, and the contrasts? What's regular to you? Does anything strike you as more regular than others?
Yeah, like I definitely use pink a lot, especially more recently, and I would equate that to the personal development I've done again through therapy, in terms of using my art to be vulnerable, and show that vulnerability with that kind of colour scheme. And as well, the sad clowns, that's a recurring theme throughout my art. And I have drawn myself, let me think, 3 times maybe, as self-portraits as sad clowns. So I'm going to have to compile them all together now and have a look at all my art and see what I can see.
I guess this is maybe part of the philosopher in me as well. I like patterns. And so I like to figure things out. I like to look at it, and the easiest way to figure things out is to see what's common to something. So I look at that in my own music. What do I do? What's common to my music, and what's different from my music to everybody else's? What is the thing that makes me? And I guess for art, you would be looking at things like your use of color, your use of dimensions. So like whether it's 2D or 3D or lines, illusions of textures. I mean, I've seen some of your stuff that does do that. I was looking through your Instagram earlier with there's a couple of things where it's like 3D and it's meant to look like 3D images and stuff. So there obviously is something there, but that's less common than kind of usually got quite stark, quite strident lines, quite clear-cut lines. And
I usually draw quite flat, but I have been trying to like almost 3-dimensionalize my work, and that's actually come from, I watched a TED talk it's called The Danger of a Single Story, and it's by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. It's available on YouTube. It's a TED talk, and she's really, really interesting, and she tells the danger of a single story and how it can flatten your experience throughout life. And I think the takeaway from that, I realised, was that by kind of flattening my drawings, I was kind of taking away an aspect of me and that reality of the kind of emotion behind the drawing. So I've been trying to put a little bit of that back into the work that I've been doing.
Yeah, well, part of the thing with dimensions must be that a 2-dimensional plane is a vast simplification of what's usually available
actually
there.
Going on.
Usually got the depth and things like that. So the simplification is useful, because if the point of somebody's art is to understand themselves and to kind of develop themselves, I suppose, in a way as well, then beginning with the simple, being able to simplify something that's as complex as kind of ebbiness or catness. Like that's not a simple thing to do anyway. So to be able to do that is quite the effort.
Yeah, quite the feat. I think it's something that I've been kind of crafting since I started drawing as a kid, and I think my awareness of that is what has enabled me to shape the work into more of what I want it to be like it is today.
Yeah, I guess last few questions then, because that wraps things up quite nicely. What's next then? What kind of things are you looking at developing into? Do you have plans for things to draw or new styles and techniques you'd like to dive into?
I'd definitely like to stick with my more textural work. I find that more fulfilling. And I enjoy looking back at that kind of work. I also would like to continue with my merch business. I enjoy making clothing a lot, and it's just something that I've always wanted to do. One thing that I would like to eventually get into is more printing fabric. Something that I've always wanted to do is have actual prints on fabric of my artwork. So hopefully I can kind of start delving into that a little bit, and then kind of see where that takes me. But right now I'm just trying to keep my print work and my merch work like ticking over and doing some commissions and things here and there.
Part of that is you don't really have to shoehorn yourself into one medium.
Yeah, exactly. I can explore and expand as much as I want and just see where that takes me, because that's what I've done so far and it seems to have worked pretty well.
Okay, I have one closing question and then I will let you get off. It was really just tied into something we've, again, skirted through here and there, and I've mentioned it on a few podcasts, but I think it's really interesting. And it's to do with earworms or brainworms, they tend to call them, getting a song stuck in your head or something like that. Do you find that that's something you get? I mean, what I'm thinking of here specifically is that you have these themes, these patterns of drawing the same kind of things, and the sad clown being one, the whale may be another, and the use of pink another. But do you get these earworms, and what do you think they are for? Do you think there's a purpose for them?
I think part of them is to, again, keep that connectivity and keep that relation. And I always want people to be able to look at the work that I do and know that it's mine. And I think part of keeping those like recurring themes in there is a good way of doing that. But also I think it is important to kind of use those earworms as the starting point and always try to expand upon it, because you never know what the next recurring theme is going to be and where that recurring theme is going to take you.
It's almost like a hand to hold.
Yeah, it's that kind of, that little bit of yourself that you are comforted by because you know it's your kind of safe zone, and using that to help propel yourself into something that's just completely new.
Yeah, I do. I think of it similarly. I always think of it something that is subconsciously giving me something to do. And it's like I have to, if a song is haunting me, I have to do something with it. And it's either, if it's my own idea and it's an original piece, then I have to go and make it. And if it's a song that I just happen to like, at the very least I happen to listen to it. I'll have to go listen to it. But at the most, and this is often the case, I have to learn it. There's something about it I have to learn, and I have to learn how to play it. I have to understand the melodies and the structure and the rhythm and what's going on with the song, the scales it's using, the key and stuff. But that's part of what it's almost as if on some level I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm just not conscious of it half of the time.
It's the evolution in it, that taking that small spark and continuing to keep it going and fireballing and turn it into something really magical.
Yeah, and letting it see where it, just following it, I suppose, trusting it and following it.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, this has been fantastic. Where can people find you online?
Very interesting. So both on Instagram and Facebook, I am at Mobyslick Illustration. You can also email me for any commissions at mobyslickillustration@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter, being very activist-y. I'm always very open, and I very strongly believe in the views that I hold. And that's Mobyslick Tweets.
Wicked. It's a pleasure having you, and let's do this again sometime.
Yeah, it's been absolutely great. I feel like I've broadened my mind already. I feel expansive right now. I'm going to go draw.
Super happy about that. Well, speak to you soon.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you.